What's going on, guys? Caleb here at 86 Speed. Today we're going to be bringing you guys a mini beginner guide on suspension for the 22 BRZ and GR86. We know a lot of you guys out there may already have experience with the FRS BRZ 86 platform because it's been out for a while, but for some of you this may be your first time getting into suspension on this platform. We're also going to be going into more detail on those RSR Black Eye Edition coils that we showed a few videos ago, just going into some more specifications on those and some exciting stuff for the future, as well as some other suspension components that you may want to have on your vehicle in order to get the ideal fitment. So without further ado, let's get to it. Starting in the front, the only major difference between this generation of BRZ and the older generation of BRZ is going to be the shape of the knuckle. So the knuckle that sits behind the rotor and everything here, this full assembly, it's a slightly different shape. It has a little bit more ridging and it's made out of a different material. This one's made out of like a lightweight aluminum. That's one of the major differences even in this generation between the BRZ and the GR86. On the GR86, the knuckle that sits here behind the rotor is made out of like cast iron. So it's a little bit heavier, more durable material, if you will. And that is also kind of the culprit of where you're going to start feeling those suspension differences between the cars stock. Obviously, as you can see here, this one does have the RSR coils installed already, but that's going to be the first major difference here in the front. Other than that, the way you install the coil is exactly the same, so we're not going to get into a whole lot of details on torque specs and how many bolts are here, just because there's a ton of great videos out there already on how to install these coils. So next we're going to go to the rear to show you the differences back there. Now that we're here in the rear, one of the next major differences that you can probably see right away if you do have an older generation FRS BRZ 86 is here on the lower control arm. Anytime you were doing suspension before, you would not only have to remove the sway bar and link here and the actual bolt that holds in the coil, but there was also your headlight adjustment bracket that was back here. The little leveler, it would bolt right in here. That's how you can see that this is actually probably the same exact control arm with the same exact part number from the old generation. It still has the holes milled out for that specific part. Another major change here is going to be the actual sway bar mounting points themselves. This is where there's another major difference between the BRZ specifically and the GR86, as here on the BRZ, the sway bar mounts on the front here of this mounting bracket, whereas if you take a look at the rear suspension on the GR86, it's actually flipped. The sway bar mounts on this side of this bracket. There also are some very slight differences in thickness and material of the sway bars between the BRZ and the 86. That's where you get those different handling characteristics of the car's stock compared to one another. So the last difference that I really found while installing these coilovers, looking over the suspension, is that here in the trunk, as opposed to the older generations, it seems they used a more rigid material for the actual liner of this trunk on the inside here. So what I found that made it a little bit easier to install the coilover was popping these little foam pieces out. It's just one little push pin here. And then actually removing these clips in the liner. There's only 4 little push clips here. It made it a lot easier to access the 2 bolts that hold the top head on for the rear coil. So you'll just pull this back, and now you have full access to both those bolts for the rear coilover. That's just a little tip to give you guys if you're having some issues getting access to those bolts. Just because they did go ahead and make this material a lot more rigid. It seems like it has some kind of like plastic backing to give it a little bit more rigidity. Not exactly sure why, but... And then to put it back in, obviously you're just gonna slide it back into place, put those push pins like so. So we're not gonna be putting this car on the ground today. Since we did go over those suspension differences, let's talk more in-depthly about suspension. So there's thousands and thousands of setups out there on the market, and it can be very, very daunting as a new car enthusiast on actually figuring out how to dial in your suspension. That's one of the main reasons why we're not going to be lowering down this car today, because we do really want to get the suspension dialed in exactly how we want it in regards to camber, toe, and different elements like that. Like I said, it can be very, very daunting as a new enthusiast who doesn't know all those parts and all those things that you need to change to really run things. You may have a certain wheel that you really like, but it requires X amount of suspension in order to run that wheel on your car. That's where we come into play, and companies like RSR here. So on this car behind us, like I said, it is going to have these RSR Black Eye Edition coils on it. So this coil isn't specifically for the new generation of GR86 or BRZ yet. This is actually a model from the old generation that they've just changed a few things to prototype for this new car. They do have a new coil incoming, so there will be a specific coilover for this car. The reason why we're running this coil is this is a very high-end coil. You can run any coil in your car with any wheel setup. Of course, with any amount of modifications, anything will work, right? As long as you have enough money to throw at it, you can make anything work. But with this coil here, it really helps capture that stock feel of your car, because many of you may be wondering, why would I want to change the suspension of my car? I love the way my BRZ and 8.6 feels. I totally get you. I own an 8.6. I love the way my car feels. That's why I bought it, and that's why a lot of you guys bought it. It's an incredibly nimble car. It's light. It's so zippy. It's almost like driving a go-kart around. And that's why companies like RSR make these high-end coils that are very, very high quality. We're also going to be running the RSR top hat on our coil just to give it that extra level of adjustability. So one of the key elements that you will need to change in order to run certain wheels on your car is camber. And so that's why we're going to be running this top hat. It allows you to adjust camber positive and negative. Another key part that you are going to want to look into when you are modifying your car and suspension is lower control arms. Here we have a SPL lower control arm. This one is highly adjustable. We're going to be throwing this one on our car just to go along with this coil because it is so adjustable. It has a large amount of mounting points as well as camber adjustment here. So not only can you adjust camber in the top hat, you can also adjust camber in your control arm. So if you spin this out, obviously it'll push that wheel out, giving you more negative camber. And if you bring it in, pairing it with this, you can have positive camber. So the next question you may be asking yourself is, why would I want to run a coil versus a lowering spring? Well, a lot of wider wheel setups out there, if you try to run a lowering spring on your stock strut setup, it will actually rub. You'll have some severe rubbing issues and just fitment issues overall, and it'll be a lot more difficult to run a wheel of your choice on your car with a lowering spring. It was a very popular option in the past, especially very early on in the life of the FRS BRZ 8.6 for the first generation. But of course, a coilover is going to accomplish everything that a lowering spring does, but better. You're going to be able to fully adjust your ride height. You're going to be able to adjust your dampening. Like on these RSR coils, they now have 36-way adjustable dampening. Again, just to reiterate, this coil is a prototype coil. A lot of Japanese companies that are making suspension, as you guys will see, there's tons of coils out there. They will be from 13 to 2020, 2021. But there will be new part numbers and new coilover systems being released for the GR86 and the 22 BRZ. The reason being is that even though everything bolts up the same and all the mounting points are exactly the same, the spring rates are off. So they are going to be revamping the coilovers with the correct spring rates. So for now, if you are expecting to run one of the old generation coilovers, do keep in mind that your car may be a little bit bouncy compared to a coilover that is specifically for the car. With all that being said, guys, of course, we want to see some modifications that you guys have already done. So if you have any modifications you've already done, you can DM us at 8.6 speed. We'd love to see that. We can go ahead and repost them. And again, if you have any parts that you specifically want to see us test on our car, or you're just curious about, you can leave a comment down below. But that's going to be it, guys. We'll see you guys in the next video.